Welcome back, guys. In VBA, variables are used to store data that your macros can manipulate. Understanding variable types is crucial because it determines the kind of data a variable can hold and the operations that can be performed on it. So you always have to make sure that the variable type you're declaring could hold the data that you are assigning it to, right? So you don't want to have a number type of variable and then you assign a string value to it, right? It's going to result in a mismatch. So that's the basic rule when it comes to variables. Because in broad term, there are two categories of variable, right? Which are object type variable and non-object type variable. So what we're seeing here on this table are all non-object type variables. Okay, so you have the byte. It's a form of a variable that holds numbers from 0 to 255. Then you have the integer that holds a larger range, and then you have the long. This is personally my favorite. So if you're going to choose a number variable, just go for the long because it has such a, it accommodates such a large range of value, right? And in modern computer, trust me, 4 bytes and 1 byte, there's no difference there. So Boolean is a basic one where you have the true and false. Okay, so there are instances where we may need Boolean, right, to have that kind of the kind of switch effect, right? We will see that, right, in future exercises. Then you have the double. The double is basically if you're dealing with decimal places, this is your go-to option, right? If you have a whole number, then go for the long. But if you're going to have double, if you're going to have decimals, double is your go-to variable type. Okay, and then you have the string. Okay, this is one of the most common one where it's basically holding strings, right? Alphabets, right? And then object, we'll go into that later. Date, we'll also go into that later. Okay, and currency, you don't have to worry about that yet. And then you have the variant. This is a very important type of variable, right? Because variant, you will see throughout the course that I use this a lot. Why do I use variant? Because the first thing you have to understand is that the variant is such a versatile variable. Because the reason is, it can be basically anything, all right? It can be numbers, it can be text, it can be string, So if you're not sure what your variable is going to be, if you're not sure what your variable is going to be assigned during runtime, right? So if you're assigning variable during design time, then you would probably know the variable type. But suppose if you're using a variable that is going to only be declared during runtime, right? Late binding, right? We'll go into all of that, okay? So, but if you don't, basically what I'm saying is if you don't know what the variable is going to be, just use the variant, okay? Because it can be anything, okay? Then you have the object variables, okay? So the object variables that I want to focus on is the workbook, worksheet, and range. And whenever you have the objects, you have to use set, okay? Right? You have to use the keyword set. Okay, so you're going to dim it, and then you're going to have the keyword set. For non-objects, we don't have to use the keyword set, right? So you're just going to dim it, and then you just have whatever, right, without the set, right? Historically, we have been using let, okay? For non-object type variables, we have been using let. So let I say dim a string, then I'm going to say let a equals to some string value, right? Dim b as long, and then let b equals to some number. But then Excel decided, you know what, we can just forfeit that let and just leave it as it is. But for an object variable, you definitely need to have the set statement. Okay, so let's go through some examples to see variable types in depth. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to insert our code editor. Okay, so you should be able to see it. Okay, and I'm going to insert a module. Then let's get started. I'm going to name this procedure. It's just variable type. Okay, so number type, I usually just go with long, right? So, a equals to 50 because long is just as I told you, right? It allows you to have a very large range of number, accommodates a large range of numbers. So I'm just going to debug.print type name and then a. Alright, so we've done that. I just run the code, right? Run it, and I get long. Okay, So make sure that, right, if assigned it as long, you can't change, you can't have it something like this, right? You can't have a string. It's going to give you a mismatch debug error, right? See, that's why you have to be careful, right? So we've done that. Let's see what we can do with string now. Okay, any string type, I'm going to say dim b as string. Okay, let's just use simple names b. So we don't have to use let b, right? Historically we've been using, but historically we have been using the word let, but we can just forfeit that now. But for an object, you have to use the worksheet workbook range. Remember the tree? You have to use set. Okay, so I have debug dot print type name, and I'm going to say b. So we're just going to debug print that. So I'm just going to set a breakpoint here, F9, and then I'm going to run it. It's going to stop the breakpoint, delete, and then F8, step into the code. Okay, we have string. Okay, solved. Okay, now variant type. So remember this type name, right? Type name basically gives you the type of the variable. Okay, you might need to use it down the road, so keep that in mind. Did C as variant. C equals, so I told you variant is flexible, right? It can be anything. I can have strings, I can have numbers, I can have empty, I can have arrays, absolutely. It basically can be anything. The only setback of a variant is that because it consumes a larger byte of memory, but in modern computers, that wouldn't matter at all, right? Right? The power of computer processors in these days, it's absolutely not a problem. So, right, I'm just gonna let's not get philosophical, but yeah, let's run the thing. So gonna move all that, and then F8 is giving me string, right? It's recognizing that C is a string. Now if I change C to a number, and then I'm going to set, I'm going to put debug.print again, Control C, Control V, and then I'm going to set my breakpoint. I'm going to run it, and then I'm going to delete all of that, and then I'm going to hit F8. Okay, it's giving integer. So you see, we're not running into mismatch. So that's why variant is extremely powerful. Okay, so now I'm not going to go much into the Boolean, right? So you also have that D as maybe I can just put light as Boolean, right? Then you can say something like light equals to false. I think it's giving me the intelligence, right? And then you can also say light equals to true. Okay, then you can switch it, right? We will go through a case where you can use the intelligence of switching from light to true in subsequent lectures. Okay, we'll have plenty to practice. Okay, now we're just going to go into the basic. So object type variable dim new book, okay, as workbook. So this is an object type, right? You have a workbook dim new sheet as worksheet, object type. Then you have dim RNG as range. Okay, all object types. So object types use set. Okay, and then I'm going to say set new book equals to work book. No, sorry, I can just use this workbook. Okay, I can just use this workbook. So that's it. If I debug dot print new book dot name. Okay, and then I just hit my, I'm just going to set my breakpoint because that's just how I like to do it, and then I'm going to run the code up to the breakpoint. Then I'm just going to clear everything, and I'm going to hit F8, and I get book 1, right? That's the book, that's the workbook I'm on, right? Because I have a habit of using fresh workbook for each lecture. So unless it's some practice problems, otherwise I'd rather demonstrate using a fresh workbook. So now what if you want to add a workbook? So I'm going to say dim new book 2 as workbook. Okay, I want to add a workbook. Okay, then I'm going to say set new book, what was the name, 2, right? Okay, equals to, what do I have to say? I have to use workbook dot add. So this is to add a workbook. Okay, add a workbook, then I can debug dot print the same thing. New. Alright, I have to make sure careful of typo, right? New debug dot print new book 2 dot name. Okay. Okay, so I'm just gonna set my breakpoint again, and then I'm gonna run it, and then hit F8. Okay, so it's added a workbook. Okay, workbook 2, right? The book name is book 2, right? We've done that as well. So we can add a worksheet. Add a worksheet on which workbook? On new book. Okay, this current book. On this current workbook. So how do I do that? Very simple, right? Just have to say set new sheet. So now we have to use the new sheet, basically the worksheet, because we're adding a worksheet, right? So how do I do that? I'm just going to say the book name. What was the book name? This current book that we are on is new book dot worksheets dot add. That's all. Okay. Now if I run the thing, you see currently I have only one sheet. So right, if I run this, okay, it's adding the workbook from the previous command. Don't worry about this. But go to book 1, you see it's added another sheet. It's added another sheet. So I'm just gonna comment this out because I don't want it to keep adding workbook each time the code runs. Okay, so let's go into range. Okay, use range. Okay, this is also an object. Okay, so you're referring a range. Okay, so if I'm referring a range on this worksheet, on the worksheet, on the workbook where my code resides. Okay, so if my code resides on this workbook and I want to reference the worksheet that is on the workbook where the code resides, then I can use the code name, right? Otherwise, I can't use the code name. So what's the code name here? Sheet 1. So this is a code name. Keep that in mind. Okay. So I can just say sheet 1 dot range A5 to B20. And then I can debug dot print rng dot address. Okay. So it's going to add another sheet because we're going to run the code again. But I'm going to set a breakpoint here. F9, and then I'm going to just run it. Then you see it's going to add another sheet, right? Because we've not turned that off. And then I'm going to hit F8 and I get the address. Okay. So I think that's about it for variable types. Okay. So we will be going through a lot of examples. This lecture is to just familiarize you with how to dim it, how to set values onto it, how to use a type name, what the variant is, and for an object we use the set, right? And the basic operations of adding worksheet, adding workbook, right? So if you understand that, you're good to go, and you'll be there by the end of the course. Take care. See you then.